So, welcome everyone. I'm Alexander Mihalcea, and today we're joining by Ian Ormerod, CEO and co-founder to Switch2Zero. Thank you for being here.
Pleasure. Great to be here. Thank you.
Before we dive in, could you give us a quick overview of what Switch does?
Sure. So we're a tech startup founded about 3 years ago. Our focus is helping businesses understand their carbon footprint, take a plan and take reductive action to reduce that footprint over time, and report on that progress and that sort of roadmap, either from a regulatory point of view or to other stakeholders. So think of it as a one-stop shop where you can come in, understand what your carbon footprint is, make plans to reduce it, and execute those plans, and then evidence the execution of those plans. We do also focus and have products for B2C, so for consumers rather than businesses. But our primary focus as a business is helping other businesses rather than the consumer side of things.
Yeah,
Because of the way we build our technology, it's very easy for us to spin out products for consumers at the same time. So we do that because it makes sense to.
right. That's fascinating. And what inspired you to create to Zero? Was there a specific moment or experience that sparked the journey?
So it's a combination of a number of things, really. But I've been fortunate to have quite a long career in financial services. So my background is actually in banking, and I've worked for some of the biggest banks across the globe, and increasingly became specialized in digital transformation and the fintech space. So I was helping banks build, acquire, and invest in fintech businesses and new business models and things. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I had the opportunity, though, to take 12 months out, or I decided to take a bit of a sabbatical. And during that period, I had fully intended to go back into banking at that point. So when I left, but during that 12-month period, I thoroughly enjoyed my time. It was at lockdown, though. So I had intended to go traveling a fair bit with the
Mm.
family and things. That didn't happen. And because we were kind of locked in to a degree, I was looking for other things to kind of do in the background and started thinking about other problems I could go after. So really, I started thinking about, given all the experience I've got in banking and fintech and building businesses and all that sort of stuff, I could go back into banking, but could I throw those experience and those skills at another problem or another opportunity and do something a bit different?
Right.
I looked at a number of things that I'm quite passionate about, one of which is the challenge and the legacy we are leaving for future generations as a result of the way we consume the Earth's resources. And I was kind of challenged by my kids, if I'm honest, saying, well, you talk a good game, Dad, but are you actually going to do something about it? So that's where Switch2Zero came from. It was me then exploring, how can I help address the problem of the way in which we consume resources globally?
Right. And let's go back to when you first started. What major challenges or gaps did you see in the market that made you think this needs to be solved?
Well, I think for me, it was when I looked at what was out there. I What I really found was there are a lot of solutions that have been created. I mean, I say that it's actually a relatively new space, so there aren't hundreds of different providers and everything like that. It's a relatively nascent market, but those that were out there, the vast majority were, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but were founded almost from a principle base. And what I mean by that was they were very kind of rules focused and approach focused. In other words, this is the right way to do something, and this is what you must do first, and it's got to be exact before you can move to the next stage. And as a result of that kind of approach, the solutions were very unuser friendly. Whereas what I believed is, if you really want to create and turn the dial at scale, you've got to make it very consumable and very rewarding. So I suppose the big challenge I had or the opportunity I saw when I reviewed the market was, how can we make the journey of understanding your footprint and reducing it and reporting on it as simple and straightforward and pragmatic as possible. But equally, how can we tie to that commercial value generation? Because if you're in a business and you're trying to spin loads of plates to drive your business forward, lowering and understanding your footprint isn't going to get that close to the top of that to-do list unless there's a commercial reason for you needing to do it. And so if you can turn all of that activity into a commercial driver for your business, that's going to be a real carrot for businesses to approach and focus in that space. So really what I was trying to do was take the need for businesses to understand and reduce their footprint, flip it on its head and say, how can you turn that into a real value driver for the business? Because otherwise, your pitch to businesses is almost a moral impetus. You're sort of saying, hey, look, as a business, you've got a big footprint. Can you change it? We need to reduce it. And they're sort of saying, well, I kind of like to, but I've got shed loads of other stuff to do. Whereas what I'm saying is, hey, as your consumers, your customers, your business customers, if you're a B2B business, are all getting much more interested and focused in the sustainability space, you have an opportunity to make that a competitive advantage. Let's help you do that. And that's really how we go about it.
Okay, that's interesting. And could you elaborate on why the existing solutions weren't meeting these needs?
I think largely because they just weren't coming at it from a commercial perspective. What you were seeing, the vast majority of things out there were spreadsheet-based footprint calculators, that required an enormous amount of user input. They were complicated to complete. And the value that they gave you at the end was just a number, or a set of numbers. What it wasn't was, well, what do you do about that? What do you build forward? So, what we were looking to do is look at the end-to-end journey and make it as reward driven as possible. So if you're asking any user for an amount of effort, so if they've got to do something on your platform, you've got to think, how quickly can we get a reward to them for doing that? Because if that payback loop isn't clear and fast, why would they bother putting effort into the platform? And so for us, it was, how can you create a low on-ramp and make it easy for them to do things and ensure that as soon as you're asking them to consider doing something, you're clear about what the reward is, what the output is, and how it drives value for them as a business. And I think if we were looking at, if we're looking at competing platforms, they don't really do that. They're just asking you for information and for stuff. And, often they're giving you a result, but they're not giving you a result that adds value. You've got to take whatever that output is, do something else with it to start to generate value.
And for example, I have a curiosity about this. How do you approach getting buy-in from stakeholders when implementing new processes?
Well, it depends who you're categorizing as a stakeholder there, to be honest. So, in terms of the flow across our platform, our stakeholders are always our customers. And so we won't release anything unless we've tested it with some customer groups first. So if we're changing the flows or the processes or the approach of what we're doing, it's largely driven by feedback we've already received from our members. But if it isn't, and it's more on the innovation side of what we're doing, in other words, we thought actually we can do something this way and it makes it much more intuitive, or it makes it easy, or it cuts some steps out, then we will prototype that and we'll test it with our users. And then if we're getting positive feedback, we'll then flow it through into production. So clearly they're our biggest stakeholder group. They're our most important stakeholder group. Now, the other benefit then, if you're leaning into suppliers or partners that help you deliver your solutions, financial service solutions being an example of that, albeit we haven't quite got to that stage yet on our platform. But what you're also doing because of all that user testing is getting data and evidence to convince your partners that it's worth changing their approach because they stand a chance of capturing a profit pool that you have available for them. And so it's really managing that stakeholder message, but ultimately the foundation of your process change is driven from the commercial reality of what that means, which ultimately means, are your users going to do more stuff with you as a result of what you're doing?
Yeah.
And if the answer to that is yes, all you're really doing is changing that message or making it more specific for whoever your stakeholder group is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see, I see. And walk us through how Switch addresses these challenges. What makes your approach unique?
I don't necessarily think we're massively unique. We follow a relatively standard agile methodology that a lot of companies do. We combine that with a design and data-led approach. So we start with the user, we end with the user, but that the data that we capture, the design thinking that we use that informs what we're trying to build and how, is critical to our success. We use GitHub and various other agile based tools to help us develop in the squads that we use to develop. Really, I think the difference for us, or where I believe we're getting it more right than wrong compared to others, is we're very focused on who is in that squad, and we won't start a piece of work unless we have the right expertise. And what I mean by that is, broadly, you need three core groups of competence, in my view. You need your design and data competence. So who understands the user, who's got the data, who effectively understands the vision of where you're trying to go and what you're trying to build. You then have the technical competence. So architecturally and from a technology perspective, how do you need to build things to fulfill those sorts of requirements that are being built within the use case you're working on? And then there is the commercial expertise. So how are you going to make sure it drives revenue and value? And if you have those three components focusing on the goal, then your output is likely to be much more rounded. Because if you're too weighted on design and data, you're trying to build utopia too quickly often. If you're too focused on technology, you might end up with a system that can do lots of things, but it's very user friendly. If you're too focused on commercial, then you are often over engineering certain parts of your journey. And so if you have all of those components together, I think that helps you execute in a much more rounded way.
Right.
Makes sense.
Right. And for example, how do you balance maintaining existing services while innovating for the future?
I mean, there are loads of different examples. We're a relatively new company, so for us, it's pretty straightforward in that we obviously have a suite of solutions and a production environment that delivers those to our users. We then have a number of other development environments that we use, which is testing all of our new products, solutions, whether that's beta testing with people or that is as a staging environment before we push it through to production. So we're able to do all of these things simultaneously because of the different environments we have to host effectively those things. If your question, though, is also more around, well, I suppose we don't have or don't face some of the same constraints that, for example, a bank or a larger business does, which is, how do you change the plane when it's in the air?
Right.
Which is a common challenge that more legacy system businesses have. Clearly, I've done an enormous amount of that kind of work in banking, because if you want to change your banking app or consolidate apps that you've got over many countries into one app or whatever it might be, it's all about how do you change that plane while you're flying it. And to be honest, I think there are just very, very standard disciplined rules and approaches you take. And you're building the new stuff around the pain points that are on the old platform. So as you start to transition, as you start to move things in, you're solving real pain points on the go. rather than trying to create the whole plane
Yeah.
and replace it.
Yeah.
And so I think for us as a company, the biggest challenge we've got in terms of our existing portfolio of solutions while we build new is really just one of capacity. So you need to make a decision about how much you're going to continue to refine existing products and solutions you've got out there based on your user feedback, based on your conversion rates and all the other things that you want to be sort of tweaking and driving to maximize your profitability and the impact of those solutions, against how much do you want to get new stuff out the door, which are new features and new solutions. And really, there's a number of factors there that you need to take into account. One is, what is your innate demand? So, you should not be risking your existing user group. So if you have pain points in your existing solution which are surfacing as a result of user feedback or are significantly impacting conversion, they will always take priority.
Yeah.
Because if you've only half built something, or you've launched something into production that is not delivering what it should be, you've got to be in a situation where you're investing resources to get that right. When you've got that right, and really what you're then doing is only really layering on enhanced functionality, but it's not necessarily a direct revenue driver, that's where new features and solutions become more of a priority, because they should be introducing more opportunities to either deepen the relationship, to cross-sell, to generate more revenue, or to unlock more potential in the platform. And so those are the things you're balancing from a prioritization perspective. And then you've got other things that are, I suppose, a bit more binary than that. So if you're looking, if you've got a whole suite of things you can do with your limited capacity, you're effectively, ultimately the question you're answering is, how much resources this is going to consume? How long is it going to take me? And what's the upside from getting it into production?
Yeah.
Those are the questions you ultimately come back to, and that drives the prioritization of what you do when.
Right. And also, when you talk to potential clients, what's the biggest misconception they typically have about what you do?
Good question. It does vary, to be honest. I wouldn't say there's an overarching one, but if I had to kind of summarize,
Yeah.
a lot of the feedback we get is, and it's positive feedback, and it's almost a penny drop moment for a lot of the businesses that we deal with, is they quite often have had an experience somewhere else, or have done a bit of investigation about footprint management, carbon footprint management, and all that sort of stuff. And they come with a perception that you have to, before you can unlock any value or do anything, you have to have the perfect footprint calculation, or you have to have, solved all of the problems before you go on to the next stage. I think for us, what we do very quickly is we flip it to say, no, we're going to get you, we can estimate, we can do things and be pragmatic around the gaps you've got, so that you can start to generate value straight away. And then what we'll do is work with you to fill in those gaps over time. So I think the biggest learning experience for our customers is them moving away from I've got to do this bit, then I've got to do this bit, then I've got to do this bit, to, no, this is stuff you can change on the fly.
Yeah.
So let's focus on driving value for you. And then in parallel to that, there is ongoing work you could do with us to constantly refine what you're doing and improve it. And that's really the journey that we're taking them.
Could you share a specific success story of a client who saw significant results using your solution?
Yeah, so crumbs, there's loads, but I'll take one that I was on the phone to a company called Standard Transport a couple of weeks ago. I have another follow-up call with them. This is a big haulage company.
Okay.
They offer haulage services, so the distribution of goods for other businesses, big HGV trucks. They wanted to, a lot of the pitches they make to other businesses, they were increasingly being asked, well, what are you doing about sustainability? And obviously, if you've got big HGVs spewing out lots of fumes, there's an issue and challenge there. They wanted to get a better understanding of their carbon footprint, and they wanted to come up with solutions. that would make their pitch much more powerful and legitimate when they were talking about this area. They had a big lack of data. They didn't really know where to start. They came onto our platform in less than 30 seconds. They had a high-level estimate of their footprint. We have a solution when they can type in the reg numbers of their vehicles and the mileage. It will instantly tell them what the emissions of those vehicles are. So they can start to get quite a granular picture, and they can choose to offset and evidence the offset of all of those vehicles. So really in the space of less than 2 weeks, they were in a position where they could put a very powerful and detailed articulation of their sustainability journey into their pitch. They could evidence that with very tangible actions. And actually what they could start doing is offer their customers a choice with a premium that they could do their distribution for them, and they could do it in a carbon neutral way, subject to them signing up for a higher cost effectively. And that's improved their conversion rate by, I mean, it's early days, but basically every single pitch they have put that in, they've got through to the last 3, and they've landed 2 already. Now, typically, and I have a conversation with the CEO on Friday to just think about and talk about next steps, but he's super excited because he's seen a significant reaction change in their customers if that is led in their pitch, if sustainability is a big piece. And so what we're looking to do is to embed that more and give them more things that they can talk about in that space, if that makes sense.
I see. And for example, looking at a broader industry, what key trends are you seeing emerge?
So looking across the industry, as we see, clearly GenAI is presenting a large opportunity, is something we're investing time and energy in to further automate and add value to the solution that we're providing. I also think that a big area that we're looking into, and what you'll see us doing in the back end of this year and early next year, is if companies are looking to transition their footprint, there is a proportion, and reduce their footprint over time, there is a proportion of activity that requires capital investment. And what we're looking to do and what we'll be creating is that link between and the delivery of financial solutions embedded in our platform. So we'll do that because we're in a quite unique position. So you have lots of banks offering green finance and making big statements about how much green finance they want to deliver. But actually, they have very limited distribution capability to do that. And they have limited knowledge about the solutions and the lending associated with that. So we're having conversations with financial services providers about how we can work with them to do 2 things, explore 2 things. One is, can we start to create transition funds for businesses? So in other words, a business doesn't come and say, right, I want a loan for solar panels. What they actually come and talk to us about is they have a footprint of 1.5 million tons, and they want to reduce that to 100,000 tons over the next 20 years. To do that, they know they're going to be needing to invest somewhere in the region of 23 million in lots of different things. Can we line up a green fund that they can draw down on in relation to activity and evidence of the impact of that activity, and the capital purchases they need to make as a business to reduce their footprint? And effectively what we act for the bank, we can flow all that data through so that they can show for every pound they lend or dollar they lend, the impact that has on the company's carbon footprint. So that's one area that we're exploring a lot. The second area we're exploring a lot is the actual financial models associated with big capital purchases. So rather than buying something, actually what banks can start to do, or finance houses can start to do, is purchase the hardware themselves and rent the output. In other words, we change it almost into traditionally a leasing type model. So you don't buy the car, you pay for the mileage you're driving it, if that makes sense. So there are there are different models that we can explore that will make it much more cost effective for businesses to take the right actions to reduce their footprint. And at the same time, there are models and that we can explore with finance institutions, which will enable them to lend a lot of green finance in an embedded way for the businesses, and as a result, deliver a lot more value and generate a lot more revenue by doing that.
And how are these trends affecting how businesses operate in our space?
I think increasingly businesses, the businesses we work with, in the finance example, they're not driven by the finance. That just becomes a thing they need to get the outcome they want. So what we're really seeing is, as consumers and as business customers, depending on whether you're a B2B or a B2C business, we know there is reams of evidence to show that they are increasingly using sustainability as a key decision-making criteria. So if you're buying something from a business, the other hygiene factors have to be right. So it's got to be a good quality product, it's got to be in a timely delivery, and it's got to be at a price point that makes sense. That's table stakes for anybody. But outside of that, when they're comparing you to a number of other options, sustainability is becoming increasingly a really, really important driver in that decision-making process. And so a lot of the businesses that come to us, who we haven't approached directly, are coming to us because they've often lost out in a pitch to a competitor, or they know they are missing out on business because they can't demonstrate what they're doing from a sustainability perspective. And that's so we're certainly seeing that as a big dynamic in the market. But we're also seeing businesses need a lot more help in how they articulate that message in a way that is compelling, is transparent, and is accurate. Because the other thing, particularly in the sustainability space, is you cannot make claims about being a green company or a carbon neutral company or whatever it might be without considerable reputational risk if you can't back that up in a very transparent way. So a lot of the work that we do with businesses is giving them that ability to deliver end-to-end transparency in what they're doing. Because their customers, whether they be a business customer or an end consumer, are demanding that level of transparency. And that, I think, is increasingly going to be relevant.
Okay, I see. And in your opinion, what do you think most business owners are getting wrong when they're trying to address this specific problem?
I think most of the time where they're getting it wrong is their mindset to start with is they're seeing it as a task that they have to complete rather than a revenue driver. And actually, it's more than that. It's not just a revenue driver. If you're positioning your business as a sustainable business, you're engaging your audience in a meaningful way, you will increase loyalty, you will increase your conversion rates. But equally, if you're assessing your footprint, you are effectively understanding how your business consumes resources. And when you do that, you also identify plenty of operational efficiencies. And so it's the mindset change that businesses need to go on, is stop thinking of it as something they kind of have to do and it's lower down the priority list, to actually, if we do this well, we can significantly influence our growth rate and we can significantly influence our efficiency, our cost efficiency. And therefore, the commercial reality of what you're doing becomes much, much more focused. And the benefits that you reap as a result of that activity become much more meaningful for you as a business.
Yeah. And what advice would you give to business owners who want to stay ahead of these changes?
I would just encourage them to take baby steps. So, you don't have to solve the problem or understand everything from a footprint point of view or take all of the actions, but you can start the journey and you can pick specific use cases and tests to see if they generate value. We can help stand that up with you as a business very, very quickly. And that will reinforce because I'm completely confident you will very quickly see the commercial benefits of doing this sort of activity, and that reinforces the business's desire to do more, go faster, and push it harder. So my one piece of advice for businesses is to dip their toe in the water, have a
Yeah,
think about how you can make sustainability that commercial driver for you. And if you want some advice or you're looking for an initial start point, there is plenty of advice on our Switch2Zero with our platform that you can get for free. So
right.
you can come on the platform, have a bit of a play and experiment, and it will show you and give you ideas and thoughts to really move that forward.
As you wrap up, what's next for Switch? Any exciting developments on the horizon?
Yeah, we've got lots of things that we're doing. I suppose our biggest, there's two big ones that we're working on in the background. One is the whole green finance side of things. So how do we help businesses and individuals access the right finance to support what they're doing? The second area is how we are leveraging GenAI in the background to significantly improve the quality and speed of output in an automated way for our users. So when they are looking for advice to reduce their footprint, we've clearly got so much data about their footprint, what they're doing, what they're not doing, what everybody else is doing, that we can use all that data and on top of that, leverage Gen AI engines to really drive recommendations in a much more personalized, meaningful way. And for us, that's super exciting because not only is it a massive value add for our users, it is infinitely scalable because we're not constrained by human consultants or whatever
Yeah,
it might be giving that level of advice. So those are the two super exciting areas for us, I think.
that's really great. And for listeners who want to learn more or potentially work with Zero, what's the best way to get in touch?
So reach out to me on LinkedIn and I would be more than happy to connect and chat. Equally, just visit our platform at switch2zero.com. You can contact us directly on that. You can explore the platform. You can get a quick free estimate of your carbon footprint. There's lots of things you can do to get going. There are loads of articles and top tips and suggestions that you can explore in our resources library. So yeah, the short version is go to switch2zero.com, have a look at what we do and how we do it, and then reach out and we'd love to talk to you.
Perfect, perfect. So thank you for sharing those insights about you, about your company, and about the whole story. And thank you for this amazing podcast session.
A pleasure. Great to speak to you. Thank you.
Great. So see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye.
Perfect.